It is beginning to look a lot like Christmas. I'm wondering, in this battle, who's going to win? You know, in this corner, we have the coronavirus. Record numbers, shut everything, you got to shut everything down, don't go outside, and except if you just have to go to the grocery store, that's in one corner. In the other corner, it's beginning to look a lot like Christmas. Who's going to win in this clash of titans? Right now, Christmas is taking it on the chin kind of hard. But I think there's going to be a comeback before it's all over with. A backlash or something, whatever you want to call it. I think Christmas is going to take it before it's all said and done. We're going to continue with our Christmas tradition as we work through this Christmas story. That's the first Christmas, the incarnation of Christ. And this week we want to look at another person whose life was just turned completely around by the events of that day. As the sun rose over the hills to the east, our three fugitives were already well out of town. They had 10 miles to the south of town. They had been running all night, avoiding law enforcement and they were tired. But they got a good lead on the forces that were chasing them. And so now they could rest. Joseph and Mary and the baby that the king wanted dead. And I wonder, as they sat there, what Joseph would have thought about. What a difference a year makes for Joseph. A year ago, he was just a quaint carpenter living in the hill country way up in the north of Galilee. Now he is fleeing for his life, trying to save his life and the life of his wife and his baby. He is moving as fast as he can through the Negev, the country to the south of Bethlehem, trying to get to Egypt and away from Herod's grasp. A year ago, he was working on a home for his betrothed, looking forward to the day when he would take Mary and they'd parade through town and the wedding would start and it would just be a big deal. That's what he was looking forward to a year ago. Now he's just trying to stay alive. A year ago, few people knew of his life outside of his little village. And now the appointed Roman king wants him dead. What a year makes. And what it must have been like to Ben Joseph. A world that was just spinning around and maybe even felt like it was spinning out of control. The whirlwind begins in Matthew chapter 1 and verse 18. This is how the birth of Jesus, the Messiah, came about. His mother Mary was pledged to be married to Joseph, but before they came together, she was found to be pregnant through the Holy Spirit. Like I said, up until that day, he's just an everyday peasant carpenter in a group of people probably that did a lot of work in Sepphoris, which was the city just a little ways from Nazareth. And so they would travel back and forth, applying their wares like many others in the villages around. But then came the news that Mary was with child. And it touches off an interesting struggle within Joseph. It's says, because Joseph, her husband, was faithful to the law and yet did not want to expose her to public disgrace, he had in mind to divorce her quietly. Now that's an interesting statement. I think the King James says, because he was a just man. Or another translation said, because he was righteous. What does that mean? What does that mean to be righteous? What does that mean to be just? What does that mean to be faithful? Well, that means you do what you're supposed to do. You keep the law. You go by what God has said to do in the law. You live by that. That's what orders your life. That's what it means to be faithful, just, and righteous. And the law is clear. If a betrothed woman has relations outside of her marriage, because she is married when she is betrothed. Deuteronomy chapter 22-23 says she is to be stoned. She has committed adultery. She is to be killed. And yet, you come to this passage, and it says, because Joseph was faithful, he sought to not do what the law said. Now, if that doesn't give you a little bit of struggle, I don't know what will, because we're good old conservative, legalistic folks at heart. But the passage is clear. It doesn't even say, even though he was righteous, he did. It says, because he was righteous, because he was faithful. And don't get the idea that this is just some type of thought process. Verse 20 says, after he had considered this. The NIV is really nice. I think that one other translation says, as he contemplated these things. They are avoiding a very real issue in the translation. We would probably say, as he was fuming over this. The term here translated considered or contemplated has the idea of anger. Joseph is angry, and we don't like that image. How could he be angry with the Virgin Mary? I mean, now, but you go back in his situation, and he's angry. He's upset. He is hurt. But because he is just, he seeks to divorce her rather than have her killed, which is what the law required. So what does that mean about justice? Maybe it might help. Isaiah chapter 42. Isaiah chapter 42 is quoted over in Matthew chapter 12, so you might want, it's easier to get to. Verse 18, here is my servant whom I have chosen, the one whom I love and whom I delight. I will put my spirit on him, and he will proclaim justice to the nations. He will not quarrel or cry out. No one will hear his voice in the street. And here's the point. A bruised reed he will not break, and a smoldering wick he will not snuff out, till he has brought justice through to victory. In his hope, the nations will put their hope. In his name, the nations will put their hope. A bruised reed he won't break. A smoldering wick he won't put out until he has brought justice through. Reeds were used for everything in Israel. They're strong, they're sturdy, unless they're bruised. And then if they're bruised, they'll break real easy. A wick, it works, gives off light and stuff, but as it would get down and close to the oil, it would start to sputter, and it would give off an offensive odor. And the tendency to do is just put it out. The text, Isaiah said, the servant that's to come, the Messiah that's to come, does not do that. He doesn't put out that which is struggling and hurting. He doesn't put more on the reed than it can bear. Why? Because he is just. And Jesus is quoting this in response to the Pharisees and the Sadducees saying, why are you letting your apostles pick grain on the Sabbath? Why are you letting them break the Sabbath by harvesting grain and eating it? And in the Denny Holman translation, the answer Jesus is going to say is look at them and say, duh, they're hungry. That's why. The law was never meant to create hardship and hurt and penalty and suffering. Justice is more than just keeping the letter of the law. Justice is always about loving and caring and compassion. And sometimes character does what the law can't do. God never called people to be policemen of righteousness, but cares and people who take care of one another. We see this in John chapter 8, don't we? When the woman who's caught in adultery is brought to Jesus, what does the law say to do? Once again, the law is clear. Deuteronomy 22:23, she should be killed. Jesus says, all right, let the person who is without sin cast the first stone. And they all wander off. And then Jesus is answering, and she said, where are your accusers? And she says, they're gone. And he says, then neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. What did Jesus, a person living under the law, what did he just do? He set aside the law in order to take care of her. Now that is a difficult concept. And people say, oh, if you start living like that, you don't know where that's going to go. And I understand that. And it's kind of scary. But it's there. It's there in the text. And we need to remember that. Joseph teaches that because he is faithful. Because he is just. Because he is righteous. He did something other than what the law called him to do. And remember, all of this is before Joseph knows the truth. I think we sometimes get a wrong impression of what Joseph goes through because we know the rest of the story. But this is a very difficult moment for him. His efforts to be righteous this is a struggle. And yet, verse 20 through 24 does not answer all the questions. Verse 20 says, after he considered this, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream and said, Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary home as your wife, because what is conceived of her is from the Holy Spirit. She will give birth to a son, and you are to give him the name Jesus, because he will save his people from their sins. You probably have a little footnote there. Jesus. Anybody else know the other Jesus in Scripture? Joshua. It's the same name. That Jesus and Joshua share the same name. And the parallel is there on purpose. This is the one that's going to lead you into the promised land. This is the one that's going to save the people. That's what the name means. He will save his people. All this took place to fulfill what the Lord had said through the prophet. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel, which means God with us. That's a difficult challenge now for Joseph. Because Joseph had grown up in the Roman Empire. Joseph had grown up with Rome grinding Galilee with its boot into the dust. Galilee was an area that they and Rome were just always at odds. Those Galileans wouldn't cooperate. The Galileans were always creating problems. And they were just a thorn in the sides of the Romans. And the Romans responded like those who are in power and who have the military. military do in the area of Galilee. They sent the forces in, and they taxed them, and they taxed them, and they taxed them, and they just drowned the region in taxes and in poverty. Joseph grew up in that world. And he grew up dreaming one day of this warrior king that God was going to send, who was going to march in and drive out the Romans and set them free from all this oppression and let them breathe and live once again. The government will be on his shoulders. I mean, all those verses that we read about, the end of, there will be no rain to his kingdom. All those Christmas Messiah passages, Joseph knew those. Those were his hope. Those were his dreams. And he longed for the day, Lord, let it be in my lifetime that he comes through and gets rid of all of this. And he kept looking on the horizon for this king that would come and fulfill all these expectations. And now he's told that the king has come. The baby that Mary was carrying. That's him. That's Emmanuel, God with us. You know, and up here Joseph knows what that means. But boy, how do you process that? How do you take all this picture, these expectations, this image of the future, you've got it all worked out, and now God says, that ain't it, Joseph. This is the picture. And now, add to that, they're on the run. This Messiah is coming. He's going to save the world. He's God with us. And now we're on the run trying to keep him alive. What do, Joseph? Verse 24, when Joseph woke up, he did what the angel of the Lord had commanded him, and he took Mary home as his wife. That's what you do. Joseph, how's this going to work out? He has no clue. Joseph, what are you going to do to raise up the Son of God? He said, I don't know. I just know that's what he's called me to do. It takes incredible humility to do that. It takes a frame of mind that's important. One of Joseph's other sons is going to write about it. The book of James, the letter of James, over in chapter 4. Jesus' little brother. How would you like to have grown up with that? Why can't you be more like Jesus, James? Do you wear a WWJD bracelet if you're James? I guess if you mess up, you can say, hey, you got a WWJD bracelet. Yeah, but it's what would James do? Yeah. James writes in James chapter 4, verse 1, why do we war? Why do we struggle? What goes on? It's because we have all these desires, these expectations, these wants, and we want them, and we want them, and we want them, but we can't have them, and that's why we're always at odds. But God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble. That's what he says. James chapter 4. God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Joseph is humble. That's why he's able to set his expectations aside and do and follow the plan God had. I wonder how many times through his life Joseph had to do that. How challenging it would be to be the father to God's son. I really wonder, I wish somebody would have written it down when Jesus is about 9. There's a guy, Judas is the name, who comes and he declares himself to be the Messiah. And now he's not saying he's divine. He's just to say, I'm the warrior that's going to throw off these Romans. A Galilean from right there around Nazareth. Judas raises up an army. And they're going to take on the Romans. And so this would-be Messiah raises up all these people, takes on the Romans, and they all wind up in crosses along the highway in Galilee. As Rome's way of saying, this is what happens to anybody who dares to picture himself as king of the Jews. Can you imagine what it was like for Joseph to go down that highway with your son beside you? And how hard it was to swallow. That's hard. What was his prayers that night? See, it takes a lot of humility, doesn't it? To say, Lord, thy will be done. I'm going to walk the path that you want me to walk, Lord. Even though I don't understand it, even though it looks really dangerous, I'm going to walk it. I'm going to follow it. How different Joseph is from Herod that we talked about last week. Herod comes along, God says, here's the king of the Jews. Herod says, I'm going to kill him because I want my way. Joseph is able to say, thy will be done, Lord. Thy will be done. It's not what I planned. But your will be done. And maybe that's the greatest trait of Joseph of all. This faithful man who was just, who knew that compassion is more important even than legalities. And who knew that in the end, the servant turns to his master and says, Lord, whatever you will, that's what I will. And I'll do whatever you want. This morning, you need to make those kind of commitments. You need to turn to God and say, Lord, it seems crazy. You're calling me to do this. You're calling me to serve these people. You're calling me to be this kind of person. You're calling me to try these talents. You're calling me to... Lord, I don't know how any of that's going to work out. It's just not what I expected. But Lord, you're His Lord. And I will submit. And I will follow your way. Maybe that's what you need to do this morning. If you're not a Christian, won't you decide that you want to become a Christian? Dying to yourself and owning Him as Lord. That's what baptism is about. Won't you decide to be baptized into Him this morning? And if you're a Christian, maybe it's just time to say, Lord, what would Joseph do? Whatever your need this morning, you have a Father who is interested in you and loves you and wants to help you and serve you and to give grace to those who are humble. While we sing the song of invitation, if you'll come to the front, we'll be glad to ask and find out what we can do to help you and commit to trying to do everything we can, being instruments of God's grace. You would come on, stand still.